Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Politics in the Pub. I am Chandran, and I'll be chairing today's session. Today's topic is the politics of marriage equality. Why are our politicians appeasing the religious right? Now, successive opinion surveys have shown that great majority of Australians, they approve and support legalizing same-sex marriage, and yet our main political parties, they continue to balk at this. Now, why is this so? Now, are they fearful of any backlash from the religious right, or is there something else to it? What is the politics behind it all? Now, to address these and tell us more about the topic in general, we have two wonderful speakers with us. They are Kat Rose, who is on your far left, and Matthew Robertson, who is on your near left. They're both on your left, that's the main thing. Now, let me quickly introduce both the speakers, and then we can welcome them both the usual way. Now, Kat Rose is the convener of the Community Action Against Homophobia. Now, Community Action Against Homophobia is an activist organization based in Sydney. Since its establishment in 1999, it has aimed to eliminate homophobia and achieve full equality for lesbian, gay, bisexual, same-sex attracted and MSM, transgender, intersex, or non-heterosexually identifying people. Community Action Against Homophobia, they have organized countless demonstrations for marriage equality over the last few years, attracting thousands of protest goers.
I think that it's pretty easy to see why the Abbott government fits glove in hand with the religious right. But I'm going to look at, what exactly the link is between religion, family values, and the agenda of the current government. And to start off with, I thought that I would actually bring up the World Congress of Families, who had a conference in Melbourne just a couple of months ago. This group, a pretty stock standard, conservative, religious lobby outfit, they argue that the natural family is the fundamental social unit, inscribed in human nature and centred on the voluntary union of a man and a woman in the lifelong covenant of marriage. I'm sure you've heard that plenty of times before from similar groups. Well, the conference was opened by our Federal Social Services Minister, Kevin Andrews, who is actually an international ambassador for the organisation, which I didn't really know until that conference happened. Well, this guy is currently leading the charge to gut social welfare. He's a tireless campaigner for increased restrictions on unions, greater power for bosses, and lower wages for workers. Well, I think if I wanted to, I could point out a contradiction here. On the one hand, defending the family is, one of the mission statements of the World Congress of Families and anybody like them. But on the other hand, those associated with them generally want to undermine the living standards of the majority of families. Well, I think that, this is not just hypocrisy. Actually, there are several motives for the political right, the rich and their allies to embrace and promote the family. One of these reasons or motives is to wed workers to the capitalist ethic of self-reliance and to encourage stable work habits that benefit the upper classes. And this has always been a project of anyone who has ruled Australia since the time of colonisation. And in earlier times, ruling class figures were a little bit more explicit about this. For example, a British politician, Henry Dundas, in 1794, encouraged the New South Wales governor to increase the rate of family formation in the colony. And he argued there can be no doubt that female convicts will be the means by intermarriage of rendering the men more diligent and laborious. Yeah, that's pretty clear, isn't it? Family relations were actually a battleground in the colonial class struggle. It actually took almost 50 years of legal sanctions and rewards, plus a huge deal of middle class and upper class proselytising to establish the so-called natural union of man and woman. Actually, one of our former Attorney Generals, Roger Theory, lamented in his 1863 memoir that it wasn't until the 1840s that a marriage ceremony was regarded as an indispensable preliminary to the union of a man and woman. Well, the family is claimed to create social cohesion, but actually it's only a form of social cohesion that is set against one in which society supports all of its members. Instead, this function is given to individual families who are set apart and often against each other. It serves simply as a substitute to social welfare. And it's obviously true, particularly for women and their children, who can find it incredibly difficult, or in fact impossible, to survive on the paltry assistance that is offered if they leave their husband or partner. But it also flows through more generally. If you think about, for example, the Abbott government's plans to make anybody under the age of 30 live apparently up to six months at a time without the dole. And who is supposed to support them? The family, of course. So all of a sudden motherhood is until the age, that their children are 30. Well, none of what I've said means that marriage equality is incompatible with a conservative government. That's obviously the case if you look at countries around the world. David Cameron, for example, he implemented marriage equality, in a conservative government in the United Kingdom, at the same time as gutting social welfare and railing against single mothers. Actually, he blamed the London riots on the parenting skills of single mothers and, absent fathers. So you can do both things at once if you choose to, but I think it's all about tactics. Like, homophobia and sexism are always going to be promoted by the political right to encourage people to keep having and raising children. But civil rights to equality can be won, and I think they're incredibly important to win, even within this context. I think, if you want me to take a guess at it, I would say that the reason that marriage equality hasn't been won yet in Australia could be put down to the fact that Australia has been relatively stable in terms of social relations over the last number of years. Actually, the marriage equality campaign really stood out under the Labor government for its vibrancy and longevity. Consistently, thousands of people were hitting the streets, time and time again, and it was for several years as well. But this campaign existed against a background where politicians were facing very little organisational challenge from the left to force them from their right-wing agenda. And I think that, the fact that they wouldn't even give one little bone like marriage equality away, it shows not only how heartless they are, but just how much they'll hold on to anything that they have in the face of popular demand. I think that their reasoning must be, why give anyone rights when they'll only demand more next? So I was going to talk next because for the Liberal Party it's more obvious why they would be opposed to marriage equality. So I'm going to talk about the ALP next, and what their relationship with the political right has been. Well, actually we had a Prime Minister for many years who was an atheist, Julia Gillard. But despite being an atheist, she certainly seemed to make time in her schedule to spend a lot of time pandering to the, religious right. First, I remember, it will always stick in my mind when she told us all to read our Bible stories for an essential understanding of Australian culture. And then in 2012, she was down as the keynote speaker for the Australian Christian Lobbies Conference. Actually, Community Action Against Homophobia and Equal Love, a sort of counterpart group in other states, we were organising to bus people in to the Christian Lobbies Conference in Canberra. But actually she pulled out at the last minute, maybe on wiser advice, but also because the managing director of the lobby stated that homosexuality was more unhealthy than smoking. So these were the kind of people that she was hanging around, but that one statement was just a bit too embarrassing. Actually, the reason that I'm bringing it up is not so much because Gillard was speaking, but why was an atheist invited as the keynote speaker for their conference in the first place? Well, actually, she was invited because she spent her entire time in office doting on their concerns and raising their organisation to the level of spokespeople for Christian values, which is what they claim to be. But if anyone's dug beneath the surface of this organisation, you can pretty quickly see that, you know, despite their title of the Australian Christian Lobby, they're not a church, they don't have a congregation, and they actually don't even have a particularly wide following. They're a tiny organisation, in fact. They're centred around a few crackpots, basically, and the only thing that they're notable for is churning out just hate loads of anti-gay filth. It's what they spend every day doing. In my opinion, like, again, just to, you know, take a guess, I think that the reason that they've been given such disproportionate attention by politicians is so that they can rely on people even more rabid and propagandist than the churches. Even more rabid and propagandist than the churches. You know, child sexual abuse has been totally plaguing the churches for a while now. And they've sometimes actually been reluctant to put their necks out, creating, you know, more enemies than they really need right now. You know, people would have noticed that they've even remembered that talking about poverty goes down well once in a while. Which is not to say that they don't spend a lot of their time promoting homophobia. Of course they do. In fact, in some countries, like Argentina is probably one of the most notable ones, where the Catholic Church brought hundreds of thousands of people onto the streets to protest against marriage equality. But they failed, and marriage equality was passed anyway. But in other countries, they've taken a bit more of a back seat, relatively speaking. And I think that that's the case in Australia, to be honest. But the Australian Christian Lobby, they have really a one-track mind. They're thinking about gay sex day in and day out. And I think that makes them perfect for a government that is wedded to oppose marriage equality. And so then why is the Labor government, you know, wedded to opposition to marriage equality? Well, I think that it's simply the same as any Conservative government. The promotion of the family and the gutting of social welfare, they've all been part of the Labor government's agenda. I think it was pretty mainstream news that Bill Shorten spoke at the Australian Christian Lobby's conference recently. Yeah, and he used the opportunity to explain his Christian reasoning for supporting marriage equality. Well, I think that some of the things that I've said already probably go like some of the way to explaining why his speech was so uninspiring. So it's good, of course, that he claims support for equality. That is good. But he's also made it clear that he supports the conscience vote. The conscience vote that basically allows any Labor politician to vote against the party's own policy. And that's the reason why we're in the situation that we're in today. And also I think the religiosity of his speech sent a really clear message that he intends to hang on to the spirit, if not the letter, of the conservative approach to morals that the Labor Party has taken so far. Okay, well, I wanted to address one last topic, just to switch for a moment, which is the issue of Islamophobia and the current political context, which might seem like a strange topic to bring up, but somebody else did, so I feel like I have to respond to it. Well, this month, Rodney Croome, who is he's the spokesperson of Australian marriage equality, he reached, quite frankly, an appalling low, arguing that marriage equality is needed to strengthen the fight against ISIS. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, in an opinion piece that was covered in several gay newspapers, he argued, there is no better time to affirm our core liberal democratic values by providing equality for all than when we are facing a thuggish and deeply homophobic death cult, using Abbott's words, of course. He cites Enlightenment values, quote, Enlightenment values of the West, to say that Australia needs marriage equality to accompany its bombs and bullets. Again, those are actually his words, bombs and bullets. Well, Another article that's been going around recently, at least on my Facebook wall, has pointed out that there are 5 Muslim countries where homosexuality is legal. Jordan, Mali, Indonesia, Turkey and Albania, which seems like an eclectic mix. But what do they have in common? Well, none of them were colonised by the British Empire, which forced its legal code onto much of the world. Yeah. Of course they have their own problems with homophobia, as does any country in the world. But talking about spreading Enlightenment values with bombs and bullets is just disgusting and racist. I think that it's pretty plain to see that the government's hypes about the threat of ISIS is actually about distracting attention from the budget and drumming up hatred towards Muslims in order that they, rather than those in power, take the blame for society's ills. It's a tactic that we've all seen many times before, divide and conquer. And the reason I'm bringing this up in this speech is because, well, it's one of the main, if not the main, political issues of right now in Australia. Like, terror raids several times, those in the wake of September 11 have just been carried out across Australia, totally terrorising the Muslim community. And racist attacks are reported every day in the news, experienced many times more, of course. CAAH is basically indicating that LGBTI people are unconcerned about Muslims being vilified, so long as we can have our rights. This is something that I completely reject. But also, I think that we need to not at all tie our agenda to that, of conservatives. It just goes without saying for most people, I think. But, just as important as changing the law is the basis on which it's changed, especially whether it's through a defiant public campaign or by pleading with those in power. And pleading with those in power has not generally been, the attitude of the LGBTI movement. In fact, people might have, maybe you haven't, because it's not maybe the most mainstream film, but there is a film at the cinemas from today, which is called Pride.
Yes.
Yeah. Pride is marking 40 years since the British miners' strike. It looks at lesbians and gays against the miners, who are really a groundbreaking
Against Thatcher.
Against Thatcher, sorry. For the miners. Support the miners. Okay, yeah. It's a film about a group called Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners. This was a group that was formed in the 80s, in the midst of a quite conservative climate, in fact extremely conservative. And a group of gay and lesbian activists who were disillusioned with the right-wing trajectory of the movement, raised funds, on all of the main gay streets for the striking miners to campaign in favour of their rights against the Thatcher government. I think that this kind of history is something that we should be remembering and be associating ourselves with. I'm also involved in organising a fantastic meeting about the British miners' strike 40 years on, with live music. People are welcome to come. It's on the 30th of October. So I will... No, that's today, sorry. I'll let people know about it afterwards. Yeah, 11th of November. Yeah. But I just think that all of the radical history that LGBTI people have is something that, we need in terms of talking about the fight for marriage equality and on what kind of basis we want to win. Thanks.